All right. Well, welcome to Overtime, where we take Sunday's message further in hopes that it is helpful for you in your life and your faith. I'm Jeremy, and as always, be sure to subscribe if you're watching on YouTube or if you're listening on podcast, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. I'm sitting here with Buck, our lead pastor. Buck,
Yes.
How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling pretty good.
Pretty good?
Yeah, not too bad. This is I feel like this week's busy. So I got a lot of things on my plate this week.
Yeah.
So when you feel like there's a lot of like plates spinning, a lot of things on your shoulders, and you're like, okay, just be in the moment, be in the moment, be in the moment.
Uh-huh.
So I feel that.
Yeah.
Like right now, I'm like, oh man, I got this, and
Yeah.
this phone call, and got to write this thing, and so
Yep.
that's how I'm feeling. And then personally, I've been working on my car, and I'm kind of stuck with it. And it's a classic car, and I'm just kind of stuck in this thing I've been working on for a long time. And so for whatever
the
reason,
transmission again?
it's like this, I'm not, I've shared this with you. I'm not a big car guy, but then over the last couple of years, because Sam, my oldest son's a big car guy. And
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I'm going to get in cars because that's what he's in, so we can spend time together. And so, I'm trying to figure out, there's this big vibration. And so I like replace the rear end, and then I'm like doing this, it's called pinion angle. And if you get the right pinion angle, hopefully, it takes away this vibration. I've never heard of such a thing as a pinion angle.
Yeah.
And so I put these shims in the back, and, this is exactly what every listener listening right now wants to hear.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, every listener's like, take it to the mechanic.
I probably should, but
Yeah.
there's this like, oh, I'm going to ffigure this out, and maybe that's pride and stubbornness. I don't know. But
Yeah.
that's how I'm doing. I'm thinking about all those things right now.
Yeah, there's the man thing of, you roll up your sleeves and look at the car and go, I don't know anything, but I'm going to do it myself.
Yeah, me and you too, baby.
Yeah, you and YouTube. I didn't give you a heads up. I was going to ask you this. So here's a curveball question.
Sure.
But you said Sam, and Jill just asked me to come help take Sam's senior pictures.
Oh, wow.
And I was looking at you as you said Sam, going like, man, I wonder, he's got a senior.
Yeah.
First of 5 boys about to graduate. How are you feeling about that?
Yeah, I think it's all mixed. I had this thought the other day that like all my sons are no longer like these little boys. It's like we're all like, it's more like this community in my home. It's like community of personalities, community of stories, community of like things that are all developing. And it's like, it's kind of like, our culture here at work, which is like, there's personal things going on, life's going on, we all have our wiring thing, but we're a family. And it feels very much like, Timbo is his own story, and he's into welding, and he's got his side business, and he's picking up furniture, welding stuff, and making money. And, Luke's like, into all kinds of like leadership stuff here at North Point. And then Sam's into cars, and, all he wants to do is like build these race cars. And all these stories are manifesting. And I'm like, so I think that's like, I'm excited. Like I just told my buddy I was meeting with, I just said, man, I'm really excited for the story that God has for Sam. I don't know it. And it's hard as all get out being a dad. But I'm excited for that. And, there's a whole lot of curiosity inside of me.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think I'm like, and then like we got his graduation announcements. And then I'm like, oh, man, like he's getting too old. Like, what's happening? Like, he's about to graduate. So they're like, there's this, like, this fatherly piece of me. Like, no, he just was like 5 2 days ago.
Yeah.
And now he's this man with big whiskers.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's super fun. Super exciting, too. I mean, and the first of many. I mean, one of 5
Goodness.
going through that season.
And they're all going to boot camp this year.
Yeah.
75 boot camp.
All 5 of them.
Yeah, so that is basically like put us in big financial debt. I mean, it is so, all 5, like this is the year we knew they were all going to go. But I'm like, good Lord, babe, do you know how much this is? And so Jill and I were looking at that for all 5.
Yeah.
That's times 5.
This is the only year that all 5
Yeah,
will
only
go,
year.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Because Sam will be done next year.
Yeah, I think Jill's going to go too. She's excited.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, cool. Well, I think we could talk about all of that all day, but let's jump into, what we wanted to talk about today.
Sure.
We kicked off part 1 of Story of Your Life last Sunday, and it was a great start to the series, and we just essentially asked the question, what story do we want to tell? And also, what story are we telling so far? I mean, I feel like that was such a great question because it caused a lot of us to go like, man, where am I at in parenting, marriage, faith? Like, what am I telling so far? But we looked at the story of Joseph, and one of the most impactful parts of his story is so much happened to him, and his brothers did so much. I mean, left him in a ditch to be sold as a slave, potentially die. Like, a lot of us can't say that our brothers ganged up on us and did that to us. Right? So, why, but Joseph's story, the rest of his story, he forgave his brothers. Like, there's so many cool principles and aspects to pull from it. Why would you say that Joseph's story is so relatable to our story, even though it is so different in a lot of ways?
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of aspects to a story that's relatable. I think, I shared on Sunday his family dysfunctional dynamic of dad, going public with, hey, that's my boy. And all the rest of you are like chump change.
Yeah.
But like, that's my favorite son. I mean, that is a terrible dynamic in a family. And so I think it's very relatable to go, man, my dad or my mom or our family dynamic is fairly dysfunctional. 3,700 years ago, they were just as broken as we are. And so I think it's relatable to that. And then I think it's also relatable to go, and I talked about this a bunch on Sunday, but the idea to go, injustices happened to him. Life was unfair. Like, he didn't deserve the things that came his way, the cards that he was dealt, the fate that came his way. It feels like there's this moment to go, no, that's wrong. That shouldn't have happened to him. And he had to feel that way. And I think that's, to me, one of the more relatable pieces of Joseph's story is to go, man, there are lots of things in my life that I'm like, I don't deserve this. This shouldn't have happened. But it did. And so, I can learn from his story to go, there's like I said on Sunday, we're free to choose. And that doesn't feel like really a fair statement or an empathetic statement, but it's a true statement. Like, we're free to choose, regardless of what happens to us, what we're going to do with our story. And we can determine the story we tell. And that's one of the beauties of being a human, one of the beauties of, stories of the past. That's what makes stories powerful and amazing. And that's what makes his story so cool, is because, goodness, terrible things. I mean, he spent time in prison. He was sold as a slave in a foreign land. He was sold to Potiphar. It's like, who in the heck is Potiphar? And this guy, what's going to happen to me now?
Yeah.
And many, and when he tried to do the right thing, the wrong thing happened to him. So when he said, God, I'm going to trust you and do the right thing, the wrong outcome happened to him.
And he kept trusting.
So I just love his story because it's inspirational, and it helps me in my life to go, you know what? There is an alternative choice that I can choose in the midst of something that feels really unfair to me.
Yeah. And I also love how we're going to get to this a little bit more in a second, but he never really played the victim card. Like, he talks about him weeping. Like, so he definitely felt the emotions of the roller coaster of life that he was on, but he just took ownership of every aspect of it and recognized, like, he wasn't a victim and he was going to own that. I just love that about his story.
Yeah.
Why is forgiveness? That's one of the big components of his story, is he forgave his brothers, and that big scene at the end where they don't know, who he is, and then he finally reveals himself in this redemptive, just complex family moment. Why is forgiveness such an important aspect of our stories and of our faith? Like, why do we learn so much from Joseph's story as it relates to our faith?
I think forgiveness, is a doorway to growth. Forgiveness, by definition of forgiveness, and we're going to talk about this, what it actually means. Like, there's a process of it. If you're willing to walk through the steps of forgiveness, you will grow remarkably as a human being. It will challenge you like no tomorrow. It will grow your insight, your context. It will grow your soul and your heart and your mind and your compassion and your perspective and context of life. And so, ultimately, forgiveness is not logical on its own. You just take the concept of forgiveness and you take God out of the equation. You should never forgive. You should pay back. It's survival of the fittest. The strongest is going to win. If you hurt me, I'm going to hurt you twice as hard, and I will survive over you. And the only way it's logical to do something that feels like you should never do it is because it was done for you. It was modeled for you. Like, the ultimate demonstration and display of forgiveness is Christ on the cross. Forgive them, Father, for they do not know what they do. Like, it's incredibly powerful. And throughout the scriptures, we're called to, if you're a follower of Jesus, that's our mandate. That's our calling. Forgive as the Lord has forgiven you, Colossians 3 says. And so forgiveness is such a paradoxical term, because on one hand, it's like, that's no way am I ever going to do that. On the other hand, it's one of the most liberating and freeing things to create space inside of your soul to grow and to see God work in your life in the most incredible ways, and to bring healing, to bring restoration, to bring something that you so desire to the table, potentially. But it requires you to forgive and do what the Lord's done for you. And that's what we see in the story of Joseph, because his family could have been divided for the rest of the years. His dad could have, never known his story. But Joseph took the first step and did something that was illogical, but something he knew that God had done for him, and used that power to be able to say, hey, you tried to hurt me. God's big enough to handle that, and God used it for the good, and I'm going to do what God's done for me. I'm going to cancel the debt of what you've done so that we can be free to reconcile this relationship. We can be free and have opportunity to reconcile our family. And it did, and which is really, really cool.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I know there's the part of the gospel where Jesus is teaching, and he shares something along the lines of, don't bring your gifts, don't bring your sacrifices to the temple. Leave them at the door before you go into the temple and, present those things, and go make things right with your brother first, or your sister first, or the person who wronged you. Go make things right with them first. And it's a little bit of a call for obedience for him to say, like, hey, don't worship God until you go make things right with people. It's like, love God, love people. You can't separate the second one and just go love God. Like, you have to make things right with the person who hurt you before you go connect with God.
100%. Yeah. And I think, that's, again, it feels paradoxical to go, man, if you really want to see God in a new way in your life, don't cheapen forgiveness. Don't just say, hey, I woke up today and I'm going to forgive you. That if you say that, if you wake up and you're like, oh, I forgave him, then to me, and this is maybe just my opinion, you don't understand forgiveness. That is not even close to forgiveness. Forgiveness is a process. Forgiveness involves standing in front of a mirror and kind of opening your soul and opening your life and opening your emotions and dealing with what happened in the most real way of depth, and inviting God to meet all of that, because you can't do it on your own, and you growing as a person more than you've ever grown in terms of your inside of God, your inside of people, and your inside of you. And when you get to that point, I'm like, okay, now you're starting to walk down the path of forgiveness, and you're experiencing the beauty of forgiveness, the power of forgiveness, and why a good father would say, our Heavenly Father, forgive as I have forgiven you, not to make your life miserable, but he knew there was something in the process of forgiveness that will grow you as a follower of Jesus. I don't know, I'm sure there are other things that grow you, but this arguably is one of the greatest things to grow you in your relationship with Christ. And so I think he had good things for us when he asked us to do these things. I don't think God wants to press us down. Yeah. I think there's always a big why behind the what.
Yeah. And I think, when we're going through a process of forgiveness, like you said, it's like looking in the mirror, because it's illogical to forgive without looking at the cross. But when you look at the cross, we recognize our need for forgiveness. And anytime we hold unforgiveness in us, we essentially are kind of giving God the stiff arm.
100%.
And we're saying, God, your forgiveness was enough for me, but it's not going to be enough for that other person.
Right.
And that's really tough. That's a lot of the things you're talking about, essentially.
Yeah. And you have to be human. You have to recognize that's where I'm at, and that's fine. If you at least are self-aware to that, to go, listen, I desire to, but I can't. Okay, that's honest.
Yeah.
Hey, God, I want to do what you've called me to do, but right now I'm so hurt. Right now there's so much emotion. Right now, like I talked on Sunday, the emotional fog is causing me to, think things and feel things, and the volume's up on everything. I cannot forgive that person or those individuals because there's so much pain associated with that. Well, that doesn't mean now God's mad at you. I think anytime you're honest with a good father will meet you in your honesty. And, the scriptures talk about that as the spirit and the flesh, they're always in this tension.
Yeah.
And your flesh is going, man, I'm a human.
Yeah.
And here's where I'm at. And your spirit is going, man, I long to do what God has asked me to do.
Yeah.
And if you're in that posture, I think that's a really healthy posture.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
yeah, I think it's probably good to pause too and just recognize that there are definitely spokes, there are layers of hurt. Some people listening have been hurt for decades. And there's, whatever it might be in their childhood, or, even in a relationship or a marriage, it could be just hurt that is built up over and over and over again. And so I just want to make sure for anybody listening, in no way are we minimizing any of that pain, because but there is a process to deal with those things at the same time. And I want to unpack that process a little bit. And it's one thing to talk about the process. It's a little bit more to actually take steps to begin that process. And so kind of want to talk about both, but can you unpack, and I know you've done some of your own work and you've talked about this on Sunday morning, in terms of what the process of forgiving somebody actually looks like?
Yeah, I think, I think it may start, and I don't know, but just what hits my mind right now, it may start with a decision to choose to forgive. I want to forgive. You got to hear yourself saying that. I need to forgive. I'm so, there's a statement, when you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, then you're actually going to do something. It's like, how much longer are you going to carry that pain or let that pain determine your actions with your wife, your husband, your kids, your friends? How much longer are you going to look in the mirror and, have that emotion or have those thoughts? It's like, it's all real. It's all human. It's like you were saying. I mean, I've said on the other side, and I've shared some of those stories with you of people that it's the worst of human evil that has happened to them. I've listened to their stories. I've shed tears with them. And so, but there is this point to go, I want to forgive. I want to be free of this. I want to no longer be controlled by what my father or what my mother or what my wife or what my husband or what this person or that group of people. I'm so sick and tired of being sick and tired. I think there's like that's almost the beginning point, because it's going to be one heck of a path and that you're going to have to walk down. And it's going to require every ounce of commitment and motivation that you can muster to go down the path of forgiveness because of how difficult it is.
So that's step one. So step one is, hey, I'm going to embark on this journey.
Yeah.
It's not going to be easy, but I'm going to go for it.
Yeah, it's almost like, when you watch a movie of adventure, here's the forest and the big mountain over there. Yeah. And, there's dragons and, all these dangerous pits you're going to run through. And you have to make the commitment to take the first step into the forest because you want to get to the top of that mountain because there's such freedom there.
Yep.
And so I think that's the first. And then practically speaking, I would say, the first step of forgiveness is you've got to pause and name exactly what happened. What took place. And for me, I've shared some of the things. What did your dad say? So, and then I've always said, and I will reiterate this, because if you don't do this step, I think you're cheapening forgiveness. And I think there will be a place to go, it didn't work for me. Well, there's a process. There are steps. There is a sequence. It's not linear, but there is the first step to go, what did my dad do? Or what did fill in the blank do? Was it a 15-second act? Was it 30 seconds of words? What did I see? What happened? And you write it down. This is what my dad did. This is what my dad said over the course of those 60 seconds. And you get as specific as you possibly can, unfiltered as you possibly can, and write down, on your computer, your iPad, on a piece of paper, old school, whatever it may be, and you begin just to write specifically what took place, what happened. And you want to invite God into that process. If you're a God follower, God will meet you. And it begins to open your memory. It begins to open emotion. And this is going to be a time that tears are going to be shed. Emotion's going to happen. There's going to be anger. There's going to be grief. There's going to be, betrayal. There's going to be all of these emotions are going to be present, but you have to go there. You have to go into that room and write down exactly what they did to you. Because if you're going to forgive something, you need to know what you're forgiving. Because it's so emotional and so hard when somebody hurts you that the emotion begins to inflate, or the emotion begins to underinflate, and you minimize something, or you make something far bigger than it was. And all of that's at play, and you must write it down. What did they do to you? What did they say? How long did it take? And that is an incredibly hard process. And because of the pain of what depending what somebody's done to you, the pain of that and going into that dark, dark room is enough pain oftentimes to avoid step one.
Yeah.
I will not go there.
Yeah.
And for me, that's what it was. I will not go into that room. I will not feel those feelings again. I will not go and write down that experience again. I cannot experience that. But that you have to gain the freedom you so long to gain, so you can love the way you desire to love, so that you can be more alive than you've ever been in your life. You have to go into that dark room.
Yeah.
and write it down.
Yeah.
So that's step one.
I would add to that too. Don't just block off 15 minutes to, block off 2-3 hours. Go someplace where you know you're going to be really distraction free, and you give yourself a little bit of the liberty to get emotional. You're not going to go to a coffee shop you can, but the distraction, you don't want to find yourself, crying in the middle of a coffee shop, trying to, go someplace where it's going to really just give you the space and the freedom to go to that dark room.
100%. Yeah, and again, this is not linear, and if I can express that, I probably will a few times. But this is something that you have to spend time. This could take months, depending on what happened to you. And this is what the human brain has the capacity to blank things out, to black things out. So this is why you hear people go, well, I don't remember my childhood a lot. Well, there's many reasons as to why, but one of the reasons why is your brain has a coping mechanism to turn it off.
Yeah.
And what happens here, and this is so often, is once you go to step one, you start reactivating some things in your brain. There's light that starts to shed on actually what happened. And there's more oftentimes to the story. And this is where you can repress things, you can, black things out, and all of a sudden this step begins to open those doors, and you have to give yourself patience. And this is why, I would suggest opening your palms up, sitting down in a place in a space that you can actually do this work, and inviting God to meet you. I can't tell you how many times I'm like, Father, you have to meet me. I don't want to go into this room. I don't want to open this up again. But I know I have to if I'm ever going to get to a place to experience freedom, to not repeat the sins of my father with my sons, which was my motivator, one of my big motivators to do the work. I got to do this. And so I wrote pages and pages and pages. And so this is not, hey, one sentence. Like, let it go. Don't filter it. Whatever comes to mind, whatever comes to heart, this is a time where you got to be brutally honest about exactly what did they do.
Yep. So first we want to make a decision to forgive. Then we want to write down what did they do. What is the next step?
Yeah, the step two is to go, and again, not linear. Step two is, what do I struggle with as a result? So as a result of the words that my father said, I struggle with my self-worth. That my value in myself, that I'm not valuable unless I do. I'm not valuable unless I accomplish. I'm not valuable unless I win. That's what I struggle with as a result today. Today I struggle with my identity as a result of what you did. Today I struggle with, repeating the sins of my father because of what you did. And I struggle with, being enough and looking in the mirror and feeling like I'm enough as a human being because of what you did. Here's specifically what I struggle with in my marriage. Here's what I struggle with in my friendships. Here's what I struggle with in my personal life. Here's what I struggle with in my finances. Here's what I struggle with in my faith with God because of what you've done. And this, again, as I mentioned, it's not linear, which means it will open the door to step one. Because as you go here and all of a sudden you're like, man, in my marriage, I'm struggling with this as a result of what my mom did, my father did, whatever, this person did. I didn't know that. I didn't connect the dots. And now you go back to step one and you go, and now that brought to light what else you did. And you go back and you write that down. Here's what you've done in addition to what I already wrote down, because it was brought to light when I started thinking about my struggles and my struggles in just my worth, my struggles in my marriage, my struggles in my friendships, and my struggles with addictions. Yeah. So much of that is connected way back to what did you do?
Some hurt.
Yeah, my struggle, my personal life, and I've shared this before, but my struggle to be alive. And how dang lonely Jill was for years in our marriage because I would not share emotion. Because when I was a 7-year-old little boy, my mom said, suck it up. And she was supposed to nurture me, to help me express emotion. That's part of her God-given design that only a woman can give to her kids. And she failed there. And that's hard because I love my mom, and my mom passed in 2012, but you got to be honest. Honor is part of it, but honesty, and this is where honesty comes in. And as a result of that, the more I tried to share with my mom my emotions, the more she shut me down. It was so painful to be vulnerable and to be shut down and told to suck it up with whatever's going on in my life and just work harder, that eventually I made a vow as a 7-8-year-old little boy and said, it's not safe to feel, and therefore I'll never feel again. Well, as a result of what my mom chose to do, which I had no idea to connect those cognitive dots in the early days of my life, well, now in my marriage, I'm like this stone. and and Jill's like, what's wrong with me? Because I won't share anything inside of me with my wife
Yeah.
because it's not safe. I've told myself that since I was a little boy. I struggle with that. So therefore I go back to step one, and that begins to open the door of a very dark room of what my mom did.
Yeah.
And I've always considered my mom the hero. And so that's really hard to even go there.
Yeah.
But this is why it's a process. This is why you have to be braver than you've ever been and have your motivational pillars. It's worth it because I do not want to repeat the things that my father did to me, to my sons. I want to be fully alive as a man. I want to experience that. Those are the things that motivate me to continue to write this down.
Yeah.
So step one, what did they do? Step two, what do I struggle with as a result because of what they've done? All aspects of life. This is a holistic exercise, not just one area, all the areas of your life.
Yeah. So step 3, then taking it a step further.
Yeah. Step 3 is eventually saying, what do they owe me? You know, what is it that they honestly owe me? Well, you know, depending on what it is, it's like, you know, my dad owes me a childhood. My dad owes me, you know, self-worth. My mom owes me the ability to feel and to be alive as a young man and to feel safe, feeling emotion. You know, that's what they took from me. And you have to, again, write it down. You cannot play with this process. You cannot cheapen the process. You cheapen the process, you will not get to the outcome you so desire to get to. And once you go here, you begin to say, here's what they owe me. You know, it could be a childhood. They owe me my innocence. They owe me my identity. They owe me the sacredness of my sexuality. They owe me whatever it is. What is it that they owe you? What did they take from you? And you got to write it down. Here's what they owe me. They owe me, you know, being there when I skinned my knee, or they owe me when my grandmother died and I didn't know how to process that, and they just said, suck it up. They owe me that moment. And so there's lots and lots of moments. Again, not a linear process. It begins to open some of the gates and the doors to step 2 of here's what I struggle with. Now that I'm writing down what they owe me, now I'm going back to step 2, which is really important. And now I'm going back to step 1 because it opened the door to something else that I forgot or I didn't have the ability to remember in the moment when I was writing down what did they do. Because now that I'm at what do they owe me, I now begin to see this a little bit clearer.
Yeah.
And so this is like this whole process. And again, this is why it can take weeks, months, or years to walk down the steps and stages of forgiveness.
Yeah. So you start with what did they do? Number 2, what did it do to me? Number 3, what's the debt that they now owe me? What's after that?
Well, I think you get to a very logical place. And this is where I would say if you work the process and get to this place, step 4, you really have 2 outcomes. And one of the outcomes is it's a debt they cannot repay. I cannot be 7 years old again. It's impossible. They cannot repay me that. I can't be a child. They can't give me a childhood back. There's nothing they could do. Every day of my life, they could, you know, write me little love notes and it would be awesome, but they can't go back. I can't, there's no rewind button in life.
Right.
So you're either left with, well, they can't owe me that, and then you're left with this huge chasm to go, I don't know what to do with that. And that's why I'm saying I don't think it is genuinely possible to forgive without God. God is the one who made the first move and said, I see all of you, that God demonstrates his love for us in this. While we still sinned against God, hurting, if you will, just as you know people done to us, we do that against God. Christ Jesus died for you to forgive you. Well, I think one of the greatest things about Christianity is once you get to this step, you can look at the cross of Jesus Christ and you can see that his sacrifice not only forgave you, but that all of everything he took on the cross forgave the person for what they did to you. And you can get to the place to say, okay, you cancel my debt, I can cancel their debt. And genuinely, at the cross of Jesus Christ, you can say, they don't owe me. They don't owe me. I'm going to cancel that debt. And when you say those words and you work the process, you know what you're canceling. It has weight, it has depth, it has gravity, it has significance. And you can come to a place to go, when I look at the cross, I know what's on the cross. I know what Jesus Christ has done for me. All the weight of everything in step 1, all the weight of my struggles, all the weight of what they owe me is now in this decision I'm making to say, I cancel the debt. You no longer owe me a childhood. Jesus paid for that. And so with his forgiveness of me, I can forgive you. Because that's what he called me to do in Colossians 3, forgive as the Lord forgave you.
Yeah.
And it may sound oversimplified, but when you are in the depth and kind of on that path, and the cross becomes so much more significant, Jesus' sacrifice becomes so much more real for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you think, some people can work this process and get to that point to cancel a debt, and they sometimes just feel they're not ready, or their heart's not there, or,
Sure.
What would you say to somebody who's like, I'm there, but I just can't, I'm struggling, what would you say?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of dynamics at play. I think, it could be something in step 1, step 2, step 3 that still needs to be unlocked. I think it begins to really cause you to examine and look at the sacrifice of Jesus Christ and Christianity for what it is for you. This is where I'm saying, man, your eyes grow, your heart grows, your mind grows in terms of Christianity. It's no longer just a box to check. It's a life. It's everything. It's so relevant now. So it may require more understanding of Christ's sacrifice for you and your sin. And if he paid for your sin, he also paid for their sin. Yeah. And so you can use that power. I think the other piece too is oftentimes there's an interesting step, and don't take this too far, but like forgiveness of God. I think sometimes we get stuck because, like Joseph's story, it feels like this is so unfair. I did everything right, but this, as a little girl, as a little boy, this should have never happened. And there's this piece of you that goes, God, I kind of need to forgive you, because there's a sense of, God, you allowed this. God, this manifested in my life. How could this ever be? And that may be a process, and that takes time to be able to see. One of the things I've said, to see the big picture, a prerequisite of the big picture is time. You just don't have enough time sometimes. And that gets you stuck, because it's like, God, how could you? But I think the more that you begin to see God and who he is, and read stories like Joseph, where Joseph says in Genesis chapter 50, which I showed on Sunday, where Joseph got to the place to be able to say, you guys hurt me, and you intended it for evil. But what God has done through this whole process, he actually saved a lot of people through this. And he used me in that process. And he did work all things for the good. And now that I see how God manifested and how God was actually working, and God was with me the whole time, and God he never forsake me, I can say, God, I would never wish this on anyone, but I can see how you actually are working in this process. And so there's this idea, if you will, of saying, God, not necessarily, I mean, this is a weird concept, but God, I forgive you. I forgive you.
Yeah.
And that could be one of those steps that's holding you from actually canceling the debt. And then again, this whole process, inviting God. For me, I've shared this before, but just real quickly, I got to a place where I didn't want to forgive. I was stuck, totally stuck. And one day I was praying and just closed my eyes, opened my palms, and said, God, I don't want to. I'm so ridiculously hurt and feel so betrayed in every sense of the way. And this is never the story I ever wanted to be able to tell. And so, God, I don't want to. I'm so hurt. And as I opened my palms and said, God, would you meet me? Would you show me? Would you give me the ability to forgive? That's where, he painted the picture for me of the woman caught in adultery, the crowd on the one side of the woman, Jesus is back towards the crowd, Jesus looking at the woman, all the people in the crowd with the stones, ready to stone her for the sins that she committed. And I felt I was in the crowd, and I had the stone in my hand, and God was showing me this, saying, this is where you stand, Buck. You just want to continue to pay back. You continue to want to take vengeance out on that person for what they did to you. And then God allowed me to walk around to the other side, and to where I could see the front of Jesus. I could see the crowd and all their anger and all their rage, and they were just captured by their anger. They were controlled by their anger and their hurt. And I was part of that crowd. And then I looked in the eyes of Jesus, and when I looked in his eyes, I saw eyes of grace, eyes of incredible compassion. I saw eyes of tears for her sin. And then he looked at me, and I saw those same eyes for me. That he said, man, Buck, in all of your sin and all of the times you've crossed those lines, for all the things you have done, I forgive you equally. And then it was in that moment that I felt empowered to go, if you've done that for me, I can do that for this individual. And that was my moment. And this is why God has to empower you to forgive. And that's how it worked for me. And I don't know how it's going to work for you in the story of your life, but it will require God to show up in some kind of way.
Yeah.
To connect, as you said, your heart and your mind.
Yeah.
I know what I should do in my head, but everything in my heart doesn't feel like it.
Yeah.
God will give you that moment. I promise he will.
Yeah.
To eventually go, I'm going to do what Christ has done for me, and I know exactly what I'm doing it for because I've worked the process. I didn't cheapen it. I didn't wake up one morning and saying, well, I forgive my father for what he did.
Yeah.
Anytime I hear that, I understand the spirit of that.
Yeah.
But that is not forgiveness.
Yeah. Man, it's really good. Thanks for sharing that part of, your story.
Yeah.
In a sense. And I would add on to it too. I think a lot of times people make a decision, and what I've experienced in my life is you're left with all this emotion. Mm-hmm. Like you talked about with your head and your heart. Like I can logically get there and I can make a decision, God, I cancel the debt. But I'm left with this almost, it feels like this pile of emotion. Mm-hmm. And I've been in that place before, and I've, worked another process, or kind of, I guess, the further steps of that, when you find yourself in that lane. And I just want to throw out a resource, people who are listening, both for what you're talking about and, when you feel like you are trying to forgive, but you're left with this emotion. This resource is called Forgiveness and Reconciliation by Worthington, Everett Worthington. And it's an incredible book. It talks about the difference between decisional forgiveness and emotional forgiveness. And it kind of delineates the two things. There's decisional, where you make that decision to cancel the debt. And then there's emotional, where you work through the emotions that all of that hurt and all those years and all those things kind of piled up. And it gives incredible steps towards doing that. And if anybody's kind of in any part of the process of forgiveness or just trying to discover what it is, I highly recommend go picking that up. And it's been a life-changing book for me, and I know a lot of other people. So, but
yeah, I would add one thing as you were saying that too. The other thing, if you get stuck at the end, what I didn't mention through this whole process is I was actually on the other side of my counselor walking me through this whole process, coaching me through this whole process. So that individual had shared their story, been through traumatic things, and I knew it was possible. And so sometimes it's going to require, somebody on the other side of you encouraging you through this process, walking with you through this process. It's a very intimate process. It requires an enormous amount of trust, and that's why, walking through this process with a counselor would be fantastic. One who's experienced the grace and the forgiveness of God to help you see how his grace and forgiveness can help you forgive. But if you are stuck, that may be the component, that may be the piece to go submit your story to someone that that has the tools to be able to walk you through this path of forgiveness. And and on the other side of that, I would just say, man, I'm just telling you, everything, all the dark rooms, all the dark valleys, all the things that I never in my life want to go back to, it's all worth it. It's all worth it.
Yeah.
Like today, I have such a long ways to go, but I am not repeating the sins of my father. Today, I am more alive than I've ever been in my life, and able to convey emotions and insecurities and be vulnerable with my wife. Still have a long ways to go, but it brought such intimacy to our relationship with my friends. I can now receive things from friends. I can give things to friends that I could never give before.
Yeah.
And then my goofiness with you.
Yeah.
I mean, I think part of the reason why maybe I'm overly goofy sometimes is because it's just I'm so much more free of having to protect everything. Yeah. I have to protect my words. I have to perform in order for you to like me. So much of that was tied up in all of this energy of my past. And so if you're listening, you got to find your motivational pillars. You got to write those down. Mm-hmm. What are those things? And for me, I wrote, 5 things down and just said, man, I kept going back to those. This is a story I want to tell. This is a story I want to tell. I want to experience this in life. And that helped carry me through the process as well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's so good. And I think I would agree with you too. I don't know if there's anything that's grown me more in my faith or as a person, like you said, than working through this process. Mm-hmm. I don't know, forget all the other stuff, and, working on finances is great and working on all these different, but if you haven't worked through the process of forgiveness, good Lord, you just start there. It's going to open up so many different things in your heart, in your life, in your mind. Yeah, that's really good. There's one quote I want to read just to wrap it up, and it's a quote that kind of describes what forgiveness feels like for people, and I love this quote. I feel like it captures it so well. Mm-hmm. It's from that book, Forgiveness and Reconciliation. I was blanking on it. It says this. It says, when we're tortured by unforgiveness and are finally able to grant forgiveness, a transforming surprise occurs. Forgiving is like a flood of light at sunrise. Darkness has covered the sky. The sun suddenly peeks over the horizon, illuminating giant clouds that stretch from the horizon to miles above it. Billowy clouds are lit with orange and red and purple. The sky is afire with colors. Such is the relief of forgiveness after wrestling with unforgiveness. I feel like that really well
Love it.
describes it.
I love it.
Buck, thank you so much. We're going to be in part 2 of Story of Your Life this coming week.
Part 2.
And it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and last thing I'll just say is if you're listening and this is relevant, this conversation, and you feel stuck, you don't know where to go, please call North Point.
Yeah.
Just call our office and ask for a pastor, and we will help you with this process. Sometimes you simply cannot do it based on this information or do it alone.
Yep. Right on.
All right, man.
All right. See ya.
Thank you.